Sorry about that, guys. Had to switch my Bluetooth on.
Sorry about that, guys.
And kill this volume, and we're good to go. Okay, so super interesting subject. My name is Ayahuma, and I'm an ayahuasca spirit. Real, all real. So I guess that settles that. Thanks for watching. Of course, I'm totally joking. So, first of all, I want to say that I'm definitely not trying to like knock anyone's belief system when I'm trying to tear this down. I think it's just really important to try to develop a real metaphysic in the same way that you would, you know, approach anything in your more material, mechanistic, physical life. And so, really looking at these things with a critical eye and an open mind is really important. And I think I've experienced and I've heard enough stories that I think this subject really actually does a fair job of challenging the purely material ontological structure that the Western world has adopted. I've had a lot of experiences that really, really test my most intense skepticism and criticism. And I've heard some stories, even from some famous people like Shane Mouse, the comedian, has got a really, really good story in this regard. So before we jump in, though, I want to talk a little bit about, what is reality? Um, the astral pace, that's a good one, Mr. Charles. What is reality? People have this, I guess it's like a pop culture trend to adopt this sort of solipsism in regards to our spirituality and sort of accept that it's almost a cop out. I feel like that we can't do any better, so we might as well just believe whatever we want because no one knows anything anyways. And I'm not quite buying it. That it just doesn't really work for me. I think that it's not that we're searching for some dogma that we will then impose on everyone as if it's the truth, which is of course the way that religion has approached this for way too long. Um, but I do think that some things are true and some things are false, and some things are real and some things are not. And when someone says, whatever you believe is your truth, I'd say, well, load a 45 caliber Desert Eagle, shoot yourself in the foot, believing as hard as you can that there's not going to be a wound, or step out into traffic. And I'm not actually advising these things. I'm just trying to make a point that, some things are real and your belief is not going to do anything to change that. And I think that whether or not spirits have an objective existence of their own is one of those things. And so, let's talk a little bit about the reality. Reality, I think, is largely a matter of consensus. So you go to Egypt, you see gigantic pyramids, a bunch of different people observe them, everyone agrees, big pyramids in Egypt. When we look throughout history, all over the planet, I think probably every single culture, except for the Warani, actually, that live here in the Amazon right down the river, they have no spiritual concepts at all. It's just the material world, and that's it. There's no spirit world. It's also interesting to note that the Warani have never altered their consciousness. They actually don't use ayahuasca or Wilca or Yopo or San Pedro or any of those things. And they also don't have a belief in the spirit world, which, there could be a correlation there. Um, but what I'm saying in general is that all throughout history, and all over the planet, people generally have some kind of concept of spirit. What exactly that means can vary quite a bit from culture to culture and time period to time period, but there are also a lot of very striking similarities in the concept of what spirits are and what they can do. Oftentimes, they are described as beings that we can get information from that we need. Whether you're talking about a shaman in South America or a magician in the Western occult tradition that is summoning a demon into the triangle in order to, to compel it to give him some kind of information. It's very similar. Um, so, we have that. We have a sort of consensus throughout time and space that there are spirits. So, That's kind of interesting. Also, we have consistent descriptions of these beings that are, let's say, invoked or evoked to visible form by smoking DMT or drinking ayahuasca, and they have a certain aesthetic to them. But even more compelling is that they have complete people encounter identical beings and give identical descriptions not only of what they look like and the kind of color patterns and designs and geometries that they are made of, but also their personalities and messages. For example, the jokers, the jesters, tend to appear at lower doses of DMT. They give people the finger a lot. You know, they're like, fuck you, or they have some nonsensical message. There are the self transforming machine elves. I actually watched someone smoke DMT for the first time that had never read Terrence McKenna. I'm absolutely certain of that. And she came back saying, there were these things that were messing with these like Rubik's cubes made of light, and they were telling me this is how they make dimensions. And then they started jumping in and out of my chest, and I'm like, oh my god, and there's a number of others as well. There were the experiments done by masters in Houston in 1966. Two PhD MDs. They wrote a book called The Varieties of Psychedelic Experience. It's an excellent read, highly recommended. I feel that they legitimately proved telepathy with ayahuasca in that research. Um, but one of the things that they noted was that of the people that saw God, so I'm not saying that 99% of people saw God, but 99% of the people that said that they saw God when injected with really high doses of DMT described God as a jeweled cat. So, we have these remarkably striking similarities. Also, the mantis, right, or the mantids, they tend to open up the top of people's heads and perform brain surgery. Some people have theorized that the popularity of DMT is what has led to these consistencies, but I know otherwise because these stories were quite common even before the internet. And I have seen DMT entities, and then I see this hat, and that's why I got it. I was like, I've seen Ayahuma before. I've seen several indigenous DMT sort of kachina dolls, I guess. That I've encountered at least, very, very similar. And then there's also the fact that oftentimes information is I guess derived from these beings or communicated by these beings that turns out to be true, at least in my experience, with striking um, specificity. And I've experienced this numerous times, and we have to always allow for the possibility of coincidence. But I think when you get to a certain level of like improbability, I mean, even when you're doing research in a scientific setting, um, when things cannot be determined absolutely, improbability or the probability of coincidence is taken into consideration and is considered a valid result. So, we'll get to some of those stories because I, you know, they are pretty compelling. And let's see. So, one argument against this that I encountered recently, because there are studies being done on these DMT entities, and the most recent one, the guy said that he wanted to see if these DMT entities could give him any information that he could not have known himself. And he determined that they could not. And I just wanted to offer before we move on that in my experience, disbelief can preclude observation, right? So bias, basically. If you go into something, especially when you're dealing with sort of subjective internal experiences, bias can preclude observations from occurring, I think. It can occult things, so to speak. Um, so I think that that has to be taken into consideration with some of these studies where the scientists, commendable of them to ingest these things themselves. But I think that the possibility that bias is affecting their experiences is pretty much unavoidable and worthy of consideration. So I want to share with you guys actually first an experience that is not my own because it's one of the best that I've heard. You guys can check this out for yourself. There's like Tales from the Trip, I think they're called, on YouTube. Generally comedians, I think, that give accounts of experiences with various psychedelics. And in this case, it's Shane Moss and Shane Mouse. Maybe I don't really know how to say his name. You guys probably know who I mean. He said that he smokes DMT, I guess, pretty regularly. Maybe he picked that up from Joe Rogan, but he encounters this purple girlfriend, his DMT girlfriend, he calls it, and she gets jealous of his real world girlfriends, um, and he said that it really did feel like he had known her for like thousands of years or something, and every time he smokes DMT, there are these little beings that will show up first, and then she comes. And she said, look, or he told her, look, you need to do something for me. You need to prove that this isn't all in my head. So, sometime shortly afterwards, his friend comes over who had never smoked DMT, and he smokes the DMT, and he closes his eyes, and he says, Shane, there's this purple girl in here that wanted me to tell you she says hello. Um, and so let's pick that apart a little bit, though. Uh, well, okay, Shadow. I agree that energy is infinite and that there's all sorts of possibilities in consciousness. But that doesn't mean that we can't test DMT entities and see if they're legitimately there, or determined if they have their own self-awareness. And the results are mixed, even for me. But so that story from Shane Mouse is pretty compelling. But if we analyze it and pick it apart, and we allow for the possibility that there's telepathy, that there's a loop that has been established even subconsciously between these two minds. I've always said that, if we can have EKGs and we know that, radio waves and Wi-Fi can transmit tremendous amounts of information. I really don't think it's out of the question that brain waves can be received by, other people's brains. And in fact, I know it. I know that telepathy is a real thing. I've experienced it numerous times at this point in my life. I mean, I know at least one shaman who it's totally normal. Not only in my experience, but I meet other people that aren't heavily into psychedelics, maybe that drank ayahuasca a couple of times, and they'll mention that the shaman will know whatever you're thinking about and just come and sit beside you and start talking to you about exactly what's on your mind with great specificity. So the point that I'm getting at is, just because Shane Mouse, his friend, knew about this purple girl, does not necessarily mean that she was real. But we do still have to allow for greater capacities of consciousness than our current um, science, I guess, allows for, right? So I think, in order to come up with even a reasonable explanation for that situation, except for such an improbable coincidence that it seems really unrealistic, we at least have to allow for the possibility of telepathy, which means that whether the purple girl is real or not, DMT is extremely important because it's revealing capacities of consciousness that, on a massive scale, we mostly deny, and these could come in extremely useful. And in my opinion, experiences of that sort of, I don't want to say supernatural, maybe preternatural is a better word. Those type of experiences, they change us in ways that are for the better. The experiences of a universal mind, of having that depth of connection with other people, it increases our empathy. It, in the words of Maynard James Keenan from Tool, it gives us a very real experience of that "what are you but my reflection? Who am I to judge or strike you down?" sort of, that you are the one consciousness divided for the sake of union, that every single piece of sentience is a splinter of this one consciousness. And it's a lot different from reading it in a book or hearing it from a guru to actually directly have that experience, to have gnosis in that regard. Do me a favor too, you guys, hit the like button, share these videos, subscribe, and hit the bell notification. You can support us via cryptocurrency, PayPal, Zelle in the description. And we are having hermetic magic and plant medicine retreats in the Amazon until probably November of this year. So if you want information about that, you can send me an email at illuminosis111@gmail.com. All of that stuff is in the description. Yeah, and that's another thing, you guys, no matter what happens, my current, or my, excuse me, personal approach is not to believe anything, no matter what. Absolutely. Uh, I'll give you an example of an experience that I had with a DMT entity that seems unequivocally, uh, to establish that it gave me information that I couldn't possibly know that was actually true. And so, and I apologize, you guys, if you're a regular watcher, you probably heard the story before, but there are new people here. So I smoked the DMT, and as the vision was closing, sort of like I don't know, there are old cartoons where this would happen, where the end, it's like shrinking into a little hole, and then the cartoon character sticks its head back out, and it's like, like the pig, beep, 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 that's all, folks, or whatever. Or Bugs Bunny, I think, would do it sometimes. It did that, and it said, by the way, this person, who I'm not going to name, but it called her by name, the entity, just sent you $1,000. And I had not sent any distress signals out. I had not asked for money. There was no reason for this person to do this. And as soon as that entity disappeared, my phone beeped, and it was that person letting me know that they had indeed sent us $1,000 for no reason. And so, once again, still, we're not left with proof that these spirits are real in the absolute objective sense, but I think it is indicative that there is some sort of universal mind at the very least, and that we are able to access information through non-ordinary means, if intermittently and inconsistently. It is still something that happens. And another thing that I've noted, and many other people have noted, is that the more you experience these things, the more common they become. And there are a number of potentially, relevant explanations for why that would be. There are theories that go all the way back to Aldous Huxley, that we have a reducing valve in our consciousness that filters out the thoughts of others, and maybe even information coming in from biophotons, which, if you don't know anything about that, it's definitely worth Googling and doing some research. But basically, that there's all of this information. There's this huge, broad spectrum of light that we're receiving less than 1% of. And so, as a matter of evolutionary necessity, we evolved filters in our consciousness that reduce the incoming signals to something manageable, which absolutely makes sense. And then different psychedelics um, take down those filters, or um, parts of those filters to varying degrees, and DMT seems to just kind of turn the whole valve off, so that possibly what we enter into is um, the way that people say that it's more real than this world. That's the absolute reality, because we have completely removed those filters, and then we are just totally immersed in this hyperspace. um, so, there are just so many possibilities. And one of the main takeaways I'm hoping that people will get from this live stream is that I think that the best thing to do is to not really make up your mind, but to allow these experiences to expand the parameters of what you think might be possible, rather than believing either way. because, as Robert Anton Wilson said, belief is the death of intelligence. And it's, you could think of it as like a probability cloud. And when something actually happens, the probability wave that represents all of these possibilities collapses into one thing. So when you decide to believe something rigidly and dogmatically, you've actually imposed limitations on what you can be, what you can do, and what you can experience. And I don't know about you, but I would prefer to live without those limitations. Yeah, that is a really common experience as well. And that is another interesting aspect of this. I can remember at least maybe three different people that, when I saw them smoke DMT for the first time, they talk about this parade. Like, they went over and there's all these beings that kind of seem to be waiting for them. And it's like they went home and the DMT entities threw them a parade. I've heard that story many, many times. Um, so that's a really interesting one. I think another thing that sort of supports the idea that this is some sort of plane of pure consciousness, or the ultimate reality, or that it has some relationship um, with death, even, because ayahuasca actually is a Quechua word, Quechua in Peru, Quechua in Ecuador, which means vine of the souls, or Vine of the Dead. And I think that this this experience of going home, could be an indication that we are sort of returning to the source of spirit. How complex advanced would you say your dog's consciousness is? That isn't directed at me necessarily, but there is another story. Again, if you watch all my videos, you've heard it. But and it's not directly about spirits, but it is, really interesting. My partner has this cat in Loja. It's not here with us, but she has a cat, and it's not very friendly. Um, and it definitely doesn't get in your face ever. And so we had Yopo, which is or Wilka, almost the same, different species of the same Adenanthera tree. So very, very similar to Yopo, contains three different forms of DMT. And at one point, she looked at me and said, "I can telepathically communicate with my cat right now." And I was like, "Oh my God, we've really done it this time. She's melted her brain." And so almost immediately, the cat runs over, gets nose to nose with her, and starts meowing its head off. And then the cat seems to get really upset and is like rolling around, meowing, and Enrica starts bawling, and I'm like watching this, just completely stunned. And perhaps even more interesting, though, the next day I ran into my neighbor, and the first thing he said to me when he saw me, not hello, even, just, "Do you think it's possible that consciousness is like this universal field, and that it's even possible sometimes to telepathically link up with a dog or a cat?" So these experiences kind of indicate to me that there is this, as my neighbor said, this universal field, and these plant medicines and psychedelics, LSD does this as well, links us up. And I've even felt, and many other people have expressed this to me, that the medicine actually starts working and you start experiencing these things before you even take it, and well after the experience. Um, And feel free, you guys, if you want to ask anything. Okay, so let's talk more specifically about ayahuasca spirits, and some of the things that I've experienced that seem to indicate to me that these beings at least have access to information that we cannot have access to, or do not have access to. Also, it's interesting to consider how it is that very oftentimes Pachamama, as the spirit, the female spirit that is associated with ayahuasca, is often called. How does Pachamama know what we need to do to heal ourselves and what's wrong with us? Which, in my experience, is absolutely true. But while we're on the subject of Pachamama, I should mention, sort of against the idea that these spirits are real, that there was a study done where people that did not have a preconceived idea of whether this spirit of ayahuasca was male or female, um, they had no preconceived notion, and then they were polled, and it was pretty much even, like 49% to 51%. So that's kind of interesting that if you're not going into ayahuasca with a preconceived conception of male or female spirit, it's pretty much split down the middle, which kind of indicates that Pachamama is not objectively real, at least not um, to the degree that she has gender. What's going on, Fernando? Interpretation about visions of snakes. I mean, that is a long subject. Maybe I'll make a whole video about that at some point. But suffice it to say, for por ahora, that the snake has universally, not universally, but pretty ubiquitously, I guess, been a symbol of fertility and virility and wisdom all over the planet. The ayahuasca, of course, is one of the animales poder, the power animals of ayahuasca, with pretty much every tribe in the jungle. And you could say that that's because it's looks like a big long serpent. I think there's a little bit more to it than that. But then we have the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl of the Mayans, and all sorts of, I mean, the serpent in the Bible that I think actually told the truth and was then demonized by the Christian church. But again, it represented, even in the Bible, the spirit of truth. Um, so let me give you guys an example of a couple of examples of Pachamama, this ayahuasca spirit, giving me information that I couldn't have known. In one instance, before I was even remotely, there was no indication that I would ever be romantically involved with my partner, and it seemed completely unrealistic. Pachamama said, she will have your babies, and we have at least one already. 4 years later, he's two and a half. So that was crazy. But a really interesting one, I think, is this experience where I was shown that I had a severe parasite infection. I had gotten lost a few years earlier in Northern California. I was out picking black trumpets and other wild gourmet mushrooms in the hills of Northern California. And I went down the wrong side of the mountain without realizing it, and then it got dark, and I was stalked by a mountain lion. At one point, I was walking in mud, and I realized I'd gone the wrong way. And when I turned around to go back, I discovered there were mountain lion prints in my boot prints. This went on for like 3 days. The cat was tracking me because it had kittens. I think it wasn't really interested in me per se, but it was keeping a very close eye on me because it had cubs. um, but at any rate, so I was drinking mostly out of leaves, but out of creeks. And I was laying on the deck in the Amazon at this house, and I had been complaining that uh, my visions were just gobbledygook. They were nonsense. It was just all tentacles and colors and weird nonsense that had no. Yeah, you can definitely read minds. But let's get through this, and then we'll talk about that. Um, yeah, I was complaining that it was all nonsense. So, I'm telling Pachamama, can you give me something I can use, because this is really I don't even understand why I'm doing this sometimes. I'm just looking at all this weird stuff, and it doesn't help. And what's the point? And she said, okay, I'll give you something I can use, or you can use. And suddenly there was this sort of armored black spirit being sort of dancing real slow and super confident, which, by the way, in my visions, they always have that characteristic. They're always doing this really slow dance with this, like, the ultimate confidence. It's not hubristic or egoic. It's just like they're not self-conscious at all, and they're just, maybe it's because they're billions of years old or whatever, and infinite, and so they just have a lot of confidence. And it was doing this weird slow dance, and every time it would do like a little extra trick, all of these locusts would just go nuts around me in the trees, which totally could have been a coincidence. But because of that, I said, okay, Pachamama, what is this, some locust god? I mean, it's cool that you can do this, but it does not help me. It doesn't tell me anything. It's still nothing. And she said, okay, well, how about this? And there's suddenly this beautiful alien geisha sort of woman sitting in front of me. And she places her hand into her chest and sort of throws these green, neon almost characters that sort of looked like Japanese or, some Asian uh, writing, but really weird, much more strange, but sort of generally like that. And still, I was like, okay, that's awesome, but what am I going to do with that? And she said, you'll make music with them. They're the sounds that made creation. And that take a note there, because that's really significant, and this story is about to take a turn for the weird. But so I said, I still can't use that. And she said, well, here's something you can definitely use. Remember when you got lost in the mountains in California? And she opened my guts so that I could see into them, and there were all these bugs um, squirming around, and I was like, parasites? And she said, yes, if you go into the jungle, I'll show you what plant to eat to get rid of them. And I thought, well, it's 3 in the morning, and I have drank a lot of ayahuasca, and it's my first time in the Amazon. I am not going into the jungle right now. And I wish I had at least gone and collected the plant so that I could see if it was, anti-parasitic or at least not poisonous, and then maybe consumed it and tried. And by the way, later, as I would actually start to work with shamans and learn to facilitate myself, I discovered that is how the shamans, many of them, will identify the plants that they need. For example, if someone's bitten by a snake, the plant that is best to treat them, they'll drink ayahuasca, and that plant will take the form of a snake's head. Um, and so, big regret that I didn't take her advice and at least collect the plant. Um, but so that happened. But now remember the part about the characters, and she said these are the sounds that made creation. I was sitting there after this experience. I set up, and oh man, and I was guided. I saw the shaman and the girl who was sitting next to me, her boyfriend. They went downstairs, even though she was obviously really upset. And I was kind of confused, thinking like, well, he's supposed to take care of her. And then I realized um, that he had told me, you're becoming a shaman. You drink, 3 times as much as some of these people I've been working with for years, and you're helping them already. So it occurred to me, oh, he left me here with her on purpose. So I knew what to do. I just sort of inhaled, although that's not really the right word. That's the gesture that you make, but you're absorbing this negative energy from the person, and then I would transmute it and release it into the air and away. And there's another version of this where you're absorbing, and then the shaman goes and vomits all of the negative stuff that he has absorbed from the entire group. It's one of the reasons, by the way, that I think really big ceremonies are not really legit. If the shaman is really doing his job, it's a lot of toxicity for one person to process. But at any rate, I did this 3 times, and on the third time, she sat up, wiped her eyes away, and thanked me, even though I had made no sounds and her eyes had been closed the whole time. So she shouldn't have known that that I had done anything. But even weirder, I sit closed after she gets a hold of herself, eyes closed, and I'm thinking about my partner. She's my partner now. She wasn't my partner at the time, and I don't think I even knew her name yet. I thought of her as the German girl, and so I was sitting there thinking, what do I do about her? And I thought, well, I should invite her to tea. And I opened my eyes, and the shaman is sitting there, and he said, "The German girl, you should invite her to tea, but by the river." And I mean, that's literally like exactly what I was thinking. Like he just added a sentence to it, and then he starts to tell me, you know, you you're becoming a shaman, but you must sing. And I had refused to sing along with them at the end of the night in the ceremonies. I don't know why I was so reticent to do that. I don't know if it was that I was self-conscious, which is weird because I've been a professional musician for a number of years. But I would just always stay silent while everyone else sang, and he hated it. He even one time sort of insinuated that I was going against, like he said, he who doesn't sing with us sings against us. And I thought that was a bit much because it kind of implied that I was somehow malicious. um, but at any rate, he said, "But you have to sing." And he was taught in the Shuar way. He's not Shuar, which is a tribe in northern Peru and here in Ecuador. There's the Achuar, the Shuar, the Shuar. Bands that are closely related speak similar languages. They're most famous for shrinking the heads of their enemies, where they would remove the head, take the skin off of the skull, shrink the skull and the skin separately, put them back together, sew the eyes, nose, mouth, all the orifices closed, and the shrunken heads. And legend has it that ayahuasca taught them to do this, which is that opens a whole other bag of worms. A lot of people seem to believe that this ayahuasca spirit wants everyone to be vegan and harmless and gentle and kind, and that doesn't really, it's not really con- concurrent with history. But I don't want to get too off topic. Just worth noting. But in the Shuar way, one of their beliefs about the creation of the universe is that there were these sounds or syllables, that these vibrations that at the moment of creation gave structure to the universe. And it is extremely similar to the Hebrew creation story, that the 22 letters, the three mother letters first, Mem, Shin, and Aleph, they sort of multiplied, divided and multiplied, and created the 22 letters, the 11, and then the reflection of the other 11, 11, 11, that whole story. So I thought that was interesting too, that, the Shuar basically have the same idea about how the universe was created. And when the shaman said, you have to sing, and he started explaining these Shuar creation syllables, I guess, I remembered the geisha taking the green characters and putting them in the air. I didn't count them, but there would have been roughly 22 of them, more or less 20. I I would bet money that there were 22. Um, and so it really, that's not absolute, but it seemed like that was ayahuasca anticipating that the shaman was going to explain that those were the symbols or the writing that represents those characters or those sounds. And of course, the Shuar didn't have written language, but if these are truly the sounds that gave form and imposed order upon the chaotic energy of the primordial stew, I don't think it's really out of the question to imagine that they had some form, whether the Shuar wrote them down or not. Um, and so we proceeded to sing. And ayahuasca has a tremendously weird ability to manipulate your body. And what I learned that night was that there are muscles in the throat that move outwards that I had no idea were there. I had no idea that you could move them. Um, and there were sounds being generated by my body that I could not have conceived of. Prior to this experience, and it was very close to the end of the experience, so it's not like the medicine was super strong at that point, but it still had the ability to manipulate my body in order to teach me how to do things. By the way, people that say that psychedelics don't expand creativity, if that's not expanding creativity, I don't know what is. I mean, literally showing me that I had parts of my body that I didn't know existed and how to use them to create sounds. Many years later, ayahuasca would also show me how to make two pitches at once. With the purpose of having an out of phase um, like tension in the same way that a tension tone in Western music will create some tension that begs for a resolution. And so this tension sort of draws the disharmony, the energy that's out of balance into homeostasis. And so that's the purpose of these sort of out of phase pitches. Uh, so that's pretty extraordinary, all of that, I think. But the story doesn't actually end there. Um, uh, about a week later, I went to see the same shaman again, and the Shuar actually drink guayusa every morning, traditionally at least, and vomit. They drink it until they vomit. Guayusa is a tree. Um, It contains caffeine and tons of vitamins, all sorts of good stuff. The Quechua use it to enhance lucid dreaming. The women get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and drink a bunch of it, and they all talk about their dreams because they're considered extremely important. And excuse me. So the Shuar drink it until they vomit, and during ayahuasca, it's much easier to compel this purging. Um, so we were supposed to drink coconut bowls and vomit and vomit and vomit, but I was drinking my guayusa and it was passing right through me and coming out the other end. So I had to run to the toilet over and over and over and over. And I was not willing to give up on vomiting, but I was going, man, why is it that I keep just running to the toilet? Remember the parasite thing? There's something I missed from that story. So when I was originally allowed to see into my stomach and I saw all those bugs, um, Pachamama also said to me, I can flush out the bugs, but I cannot kill the eggs, which I thought it makes sense, and it didn't seem like it's something that came from me. So anyways, a week later, I'm drinking all this guayusa. Everyone else is vomiting. It's running straight through me instead, and I'm running to the toilet. And then I like replayed. I didn't replay, but it replayed this Pachamama saying to me, I can flush out the bugs, but I can't kill the eggs. And that's when it occurred to me that that's what was happening. The ayahuasca was manipulating my guts in order to try to flush these parasites out. At least that's the explanation I came up with at the time. And then after maybe 30, 40 minutes of this, eventually I was able to vomit, as if the ayahuasca decided that I had sufficiently flushed my intestines as well as they could be, and decided to move on to purging. Yeah, so man, I mean, I'm sure I have more stories along these lines. Um, but that's really, there is no answer to this question if you're really going to be honest with yourself. I think, in fact, really honest indigenous shaman will tell you that they're not really sure what's going on with ayahuasca either. No one really knows for certain what's happening with these beings. Why do we have these archetypes? People have suggested that maybe, the jokers, the jesters are, for example, manifestations or, oh, what is the word? Like personification, but there's an even better word. Um, we'll say personification of the trickster archetype, and that all of these different beings represent some archetype, uh, and so they're not objectively real. They're just this subconscious mind somehow giving form or animating these sort of modalities of our psychology, or these aspects of our psychology. um, and again, even though I have received on numerous occasions information that has turned out to be correct, that had great specificity, that I couldn't have possibly known, it's still only, if it proves anything, it proves that there is some sort of reservoir of information or shared collective mind, or, something of that nature. Along those lines, though, I should share also that the most convincing experience that I've ever had of telepathy, um, my then girlfriend was way up on top of a mountain a mile away in Telluride, Colorado, a number of years ago, and she was able to, when she found me again, she knew that I had, like, I I petted this Burmese mountain dog, and a tear ran down my eye, and I had this, like, internal dialogue going on, and then I went to the car and I was cold, but I didn't have the keys and I didn't know that. She knew everything, every thought, word for word, that went through my head, everything I had done. Um, but when I asked her how she knew, she said that it was narrated to her by someone, or a voice. She said they told me, and I didn't push it any further than that. I just kind of accepted it. But she did imply that it was dictated to her, not so much that she just picked up my thoughts or was seeing through my eyes. So that's kind of interesting as well. So I guess, guys. I mean, the jury's out. Of course, um, I would not try to convince anyone of anything. I think that this is one of the most important and interesting subjects of our time. And I would also suggest that the the point, if there is one, of human experience is to go further, to experience more, and to evolve our understanding and our concepts, and to create new models, and to evolve our concepts. And I think that if we had ever gotten all of this stuff exactly right in the past, we would know it. um, a truth is self-substantiating, and like Terence McKenna said, if the truth can be told so as to be understood, it will be believed. And I think that that's true, that when people talk about things resonating with them, it's like we do have this sort of sixth sense that when something is really true, we know it in the depth of our being. If you study, for example, the Western mystery tradition, and the um, occult meanings, and by occult I only mean hidden, right? Occult actually just means hidden. So the occulted, I guess, to make it more clear, the occulted meanings of a lot of the things that are in the Bible, it sort of suggests that people that sort of knew these deep metaphysical truths cloaked them in a myth, and that's why people believe it so um, absolutely. The truth is buried just under the surface, and so they resonate with that. And it's how the religions are able to trap people, because these, metaphysical realities are just very thinly veiled in the stories. Uh, you know, it's it's a real thing, I think. So what I'm saying is that I feel like it's our duty to, evolve traditions and understandings, with respect, and but to use, the things that we have gathered from experience and even the scientific approach. There's a very strong anti-scientific sentiment that has been developing over the last couple of decades, and I think that that's unfortunate. I think that if you're going to criticize science, to say that their funding is coming from big pharma and it's coming from um, people that are anticipating results that are beneficial to them as the benefactors of the research, right? That there's bias, basically, long story long. um, that's fair. But to say that the process or methodology or the concept of science is invalid is not healthy. And I think that one of the reasons that we've gotten lost in the abyss is that religion has sort of circumvented or replaced spirituality. And real spirituality is a matter of weaving the delicate lace of experience, um, with intuition. And to put it even more succinctly, I think science and spirituality can dovetail. I think it might be fair to say that science and religion are mutually exclusive, but science and spirituality, I think, are essential to each other in the sense that um, it is possible for something more than absolute blind matter to coexist with science. It's never really been really precluded by science. And the approach of scientific illuminism, for example, is to allow for or to integrate scientific methodology into your spirituality. And I think that that's absolutely essential because what we have, even if we're talking about spirit, is energy, and the laws of physics and the laws of creation are going to exert themselves on all systems, all events, all beings. Everything in this universe is subject to the laws of creation, and nothing supersedes them, nothing overrules them, nothing impossible ever happens. And so we can actually use our knowledge of the physical world to help us to navigate the murky terrain of the spiritual realm. Because, at least as far as these things relate to us in the here and now, they are still going to have to operate within the confines of the limitations that are placed upon them by the laws of creation. Just trying to catch up with the chat here. Tonight is Walpurgis. I can't remember what that is. If anybody wants to inform me in the a new moon, dark moon, and solar eclipse. Perfect time for this conversation, then I guess. Um, yeah, Nick. Oh, by the way, I wanted to thank a couple of new patrons. By the way, if you have not yet hit the like button or subscribed, if you like this content, we are demonetized and we really do appreciate support. I put a tremendous amount of time and effort into it, and I get nothing from YouTube. I'm completely dependent upon your support to, improve the channel. By the way, I did just acquire a Sony camera. I have to start using it with OBS, but probably by my next stream, the picture quality is going to improve dramatically, the sound quality. And so upgrades like that are costly. I want to thank Micah for becoming a patron, and also Phoenix Doyle for rejoining the Illuminati. As a patron, you get access to occasional premieres. I haven't been doing that as much because I'm extremely busy with the retreats, which, by the way, you can get information in the description. Email me, and we can talk about that. Oh, and Phoenix Doyle, who rejoined the Illuminati, the Illuminati, and we do a secret stream every Sunday, give or take. Tomorrow, it's going to be on the 28th degree of Freemasonry, which is one of my favorite. And we're using the book Morals and Dogma, which was formerly a secret book of the Masons, as our guide. For the discussion. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, become a patron and then you can join us. All right, guys, questions, comments. Let me keep looking through the chat. I missed some. Yeah. Okay. Well, I will give it a second because I do have a lag. So also, okay, so I do remember something that someone asked. Can you read minds with ayahuasca? Most people probably have heard at this juncture that would watch my channel at all that telepamine or harmala and harmaline or tetrahydroharmaline, I don't know which two alkaloids exactly they had isolated way back then, but they were called telepamine and telepathine. And the reason is that records of anthropologists and even explorers like Sir Walter Raleigh encountering shaman that, the Sir Walter Raleigh wrote that he was told by a shaman who had drank ayahuasca that his sister was dead. It turned out to be true. They had anthropologists reported instances of shamans describing the Eiffel Tower and places in China. And these were guys that, this is before television even existed. There's no chance, no possibility that they had left the jungle, ever seen these things. We're talking about newly contacted peoples that definitely had information that they couldn't have accessed, at least not through ordinary means. So the reading minds thing, I've talked about this particular experiment many times on this channel, but in the book Varieties of Psychedelic Experience, published in 1966 by Masters in Houston, PhD medical doctors, I mentioned it a little while back. They did an experiment where they had people looking at extremely abstract drawings on different floors of the building, and one of those people had drank ayahuasca, and they were supposed to describe what the other person was looking at in order to reduce the possibility of, people guessing. uh, they made them really crazy drawings. So a guy skiing down a mountain that's on flames and in flames, on flames, whatever, on fire, and there's a UFO or something, and the results were conclusive, absolutely conclusive, that the people were able to ascertain what the other person was looking at. In my own personal experience, I already told you guys about the experience where I I was thinking about what to do about the German girl and ask her to tea, and then I opened my eyes, and the shaman sitting beside me, and he says, "The German girl, asked her to tea, but by the river." I just had an experience with Miguel Chiriop, who is the teacher of one of my teachers, Shuar shaman. He just started talking to me about. Oh, he mentioned the German girl too, and there's just no way. This we do have a mutual contact, I guess, but there's so many people they work with. There's no way that he would have told Miguel all of this stuff. And there was other stuff that he just kind of knew that he had no way of knowing. But probably the best story that I have along those lines, the pineal gland is connected to the neovisual cortex, and it has rods and cones. a friend of mine pointed out that maybe when we close our eyes and we're still able to see those eidetic visuals, that's actually the third eye that we're looking through. And so, bearing in mind that the pineal gland is widely associated with sixth sense, which would include telepathy and precognition, which are very common experiences with ayahuasca. Um, I had this experience where I could see through my forehead with my eyes closed, and it went on for quite some time at the end of an ayahuasca ceremony. And the next morning, when I went downstairs, first thing the shaman says to me is, "You can see through your forehead sometimes when you drink the medicine." So if that's not telepathy, I mean, I don't know what to say. Um, and I had mentioned earlier that these sort of precognitions and experiences, telepathy increase synchronicities as well. When you had the medicine a number of times, and when my mother committed suicide, it was in the midst of quite a bit of ayahuasca, and I was in Peru, and she committed suicide in Ecuador, and at the very moment that she hung herself, I was having lunch with a girlfriend of mine, and I said, "I think I need to call my mom. I think she's going to hang herself." And we went back to the hotel room, and my phone beeped, and it was a message from the worker at the farm, saying that I needed to get in touch with my stepfather, and I don't think I need to explain why exactly. Um, So what I'm getting at there is it does seem that you acquire some capacity to receive telepathic signals that extends beyond the ceremony itself. So let's see if I. Oh, and here is probably the most impressive, and many witnesses, um, like 12 of them. And it does kind of relate to spirits. I did make a video about it, but it was very early on in my YouTubing career, I guess, and it's pretty bad. I've been meaning to redo it forever. Maybe it'll be the first one that I remake. By the way, I am demonetized, so I'm trying to create another channel. So if you do subscribe, please keep your eye out. I did create the channel. I just need to upload more content. I really appreciate it if you guys follow me there, because it would be nice. It's not just that I'm not getting ad revenue. The algorithm buries you. Shadow bans are real. So I've it's not just that I'm not getting priority by the algorithm because they're not getting ad revenue. They also know that I've said things that YouTube doesn't like, and so they're burying me, um, which is not helpful, obviously. Uh, so this story is crazy. Um, and again, for my regular viewers, I know this is a redundant story, but for those of you that haven't heard it, it's worthy. Um, so I was living with a girl in Northern California. There's no ayahuasca, DMT, LSD, nothing involved with this at all, which is probably makes it maybe even a little bit more remarkable. But I was practicing one day, and my girlfriend said, sometimes I see this thing that kind of looks like a purple demon floating behind you when you're practicing. So I had forgotten about this really beautiful sort of alien geisha, similar to the one I described from the ayahuasca experience. But this one had like twisted black horns, kind of like an ibex. Not demonic or anything, but just beautiful womanly thing with horns that 10 years earlier I had occasionally it would pop into my mind's eye out of nowhere. I had no idea what it was. But I was very curious, like, what is this that I keep getting this image? I'd be driving around Colorado and suddenly it's there again. And I'm like, okay, what the hell is that? And so I didn't put it together when my girlfriend said, I see this thing floating behind you when you're playing guitar. So a couple weeks later, I'm jamming with a friend of mine that doesn't even know this girl. There's no chance they talked. And he says, man, I got to tell you something. Like 3 times now, I've seen this sort of like purple demon thing hovering behind you while you're playing guitar. And I'm thinking, well, Satan is my spirit animal, totally metal, you know? So, um, so then like a week after that, I go to this bar, and as I'm leaving, there's this Maori kid, um, and as I'm walking out, he said, "Hey man, I want to tell you something. When you're playing guitar, sometimes I was like, you see this purple demon thing floating behind me," and he says, "What? You know about that?" It's like I guess so. I keep hearing that. So I wasn't really disturbed by it, but it's really weird. It's like three total strangers in different places. They described it the same way, said the same thing. So about a year later, I had ayahuasca, and I was walking back to the teepee from the bathroom, and Pachamama suddenly well, actually, the geisha with the horns, and she was kind of purple and white. Actually, I don't think I mentioned that, but she's that from the vision 10 years earlier is suddenly in front of me. And I'm like, whoa, and it did hit me right away. Like, oh my God, it's the thing that everyone has been mentioning. And Pachamama, suddenly, the voice of the ayahuasca spirit is there saying, "Would you like to know what this is?" And I said, "Of course I would." And she said, "You know how physicists say that an object can be in two places at once? And it's not two objects, it's one object in two places. Human souls are like that as well. And so this is you as you exist as a gaseous invertebrate, sort of an energetic being on a planet near Sirius B, that didn't become a red dwarf star and remained a gas giant because of the influence of the Sirius A and Sirius B." And she went on to describe the purpose of this being and their function in the universe. And so that night, I went into the teepee, and they passed a talking stick around. And so I told the story to the group. And so two people that I had contact with outside of the ceremony were present. And that's important because they witnessed me speaking about this and then the rest of what I'm going to tell you. Um, so maybe 10 days after that ceremony, it occurred to me to Google it and see if this was known. And a paper had been published 5 days after the ceremony saying that astronomers or astrophysicists or both had felt that they had confirmed the presence of a third um, celestial object that was a gas giant that hadn't become a red dwarf star because of the influence of Sirius A and Sirius B. And I don't think I have to tell you that I don't know I don't know anything about astrophysics. Like, there's no way that my mind would have created that. Um, Now, someone pointed out to me that at the time I was saying that, no one on earth knew this either. So it's not like I could have pulled it from the collective consciousness. But if that paper was published online 5 days after the ceremony, it's extremely likely that at least a small group of people did have that information before the ceremony. So I don't think I can actually say that no one else on Earth knew it. And it could be that I had just plucked it from the collective mind, if there is such a thing, which still doesn't prove the objective existence of these spirits. But there's another detail that makes the story a little bit weirder. The purpose of this being on Sirius B was also described to me by Pachamama, and randomly, a few days later, I found writings uh, by Alice Bailey, who was a student of Helena Blavatsky, about these beings that exist on a planet near Sirius B, and the description of their purpose in the universe was completely identical to what was described by Pachamama to me. So that kind of adds a layer of what the fuckedness to this story. And so both my current partner and the girl that I was sort of more involved with at the time were present for the original story when I told it in the teepee that night, and one or the other of them was present when I discovered both of these things online. So there's at least two witnesses to the entire thing. So at least for my purposes, that I know that I didn't just somehow imagine it all. Um, so again, the thing is, Alice Bailey wrote that stuff a long time ago, so it's not like it is not something that's in the collective unconscious or the collective mind. Collective unconscious isn't the right term to use, but the collective mind. So still, we don't necessarily have, even if you take my story at face value, it's not really absolute proof that this was a spirit telling me these things. It is only really proof that we have access to information that humans anywhere in time or space uh, have, that we have access to them somehow. Um, and in my experience, they transmitted Mr. Charles certain teachings to members of the way it was described by Pachamama and Alice Bailey, to even the consciousness of minerals and plants and humans. They're basically teaching the same stuff that I teach on this channel, I guess, because if Pachamama is to be believed, that's where I get it from. And I guess it's that idea that is popular in the New Age community of star seeds, which actually originated with Timothy Leary. The guy that wrote that book stole it. It's not his idea. The starseed transmissions were written by Timothy Leary while he was in prison, and a group of three other people in the early 70s. In my opinion, Shotokan Black Belt Academy, I don't really believe in demons. I think that evil comes from chaos and entropy, and that it's not really an active principle. That's kind of the point of negativity. It's passive. It's the space between the order that gives room for that sort of entropic or negative stuff to happen as sort of like the antonymical balance to the positive charge to give space for movement. It's and one of the reasons that I feel that so strongly, there's a couple of reasons. One is that there are at least a few tribes here in the Amazon that don't even have a concept of negative beings or negative spirits, parasitical entities. I also think that if it's true that disbelief can, to some extent, negate um, the influence of something, it may be in your best interest to just not believe in that. Also, it can lead to really toxic psychology where people are using them as a crutch. And I've known a lot of people that have fallen victim, I would say, to this sort of new age idea, and they won't take responsibility for their actions or get mental health help because they believe that there are parasitical entities that are feeding on their mind and their consciousness. And another reason that I don't think that there are negative beings is that I have smoked a ton of DMT in my life. I have drank hundreds and hundreds, if not even maybe 1,000 cups of ayahuasca over the course of my life. And Yopo, I didn't mention those beings actually. Maybe before I wrap this up, I will talk about them a little bit. But I have never once received information that was false from any of these beings. If there was any specific like stuff like, you'll receive this amount of money from this person, I received that amount of money from that person. I was told that my current baby mama would be my future baby mama before there was any indication that we'd be involved. That became true. There's a number of others, but I've never been lied to, and never once has one of these beings said, go and kill someone, kill yourself. do anything negative or harmful. They always seem to have good intent. And I think that that could also be an indication that they're not actually part of our subconscious, because we do have, I have had over the years. I mean, that's why I didn't start taking all this medicine, because I was a balanced, healthy person. I mean, that was, I had a lot of stuff to heal. That's the point. If you're taking this stuff for some other reason, it can be okay. Actually, I think that healthy, balanced people shouldn't have to deny themselves the extraordinary experience of DMT or ayahuasca. That's not what I'm saying. Um, you're only out of line if it's like abuse. Even recreation, I think, is fine. Um, and who the hell abuses ayahuasca? I mean, that's a tough one. Uh, but the point being that, even those of us that have severely toxic, self-sabotaging, aspects of our psychology, these beings are being helpful and giving constructive information at all times. So it's just interesting, and I've considered the possibility that the reason perhaps that they're never negative is that they don't have any concept of death or harm, because they only exist in a realm of pure consciousness where those things have no reality. They don't even know what that is. So that's my experience, that if these beings are real, they're entirely good-willed, or at least neutral. Even when they'll scare the shit out of you, it seems to have some kind of purpose. How do I consume Yopo? Well, Wilca and Yopo are seeds of Adenanthera, peregrina, or a calabrina. Um, and so they contain three different forms of DMT, and they are traditionally, and this is how I make it, they're burnt at least 900 degrees for about an hour in order to make these. We use these giant snail shells that can be found here in South America. Um, and there is G. bufo. I've never smoked the toad venom directly, but there is 5-MeO-DMT in the plant that I make my ayahuasca with. Although it's not a lot, it still has some effect on the experience. The plant is Diplopterus cabrera, and or Chaliponga. It's also called Chagrapanga, or Yahe Oko Yahe by the Shuar people. Um, and the seeds that I was talking about also contain bufotenine or 5-HO-DMT, as well as 5-MeO-DMT and N-DMT, as long as a whole, or as well as a whole host of other compounds. And so you mix it with the snail shell, and it's blown into the nose. And uh, man, it's a crazy one. That's another. I don't know. I haven't tried Yopo. I've only done Wilca, which is extremely similar, but the ratio of compounds is different. So it's my understanding that the experience is a little bit different. But I've also noticed that from one tree to another, there seems to be some variation in the ratio of NN-DMT, 5-MeO, and 5-HO-DMT. So I don't know if it's really that the species vary so much as maybe just the conditions influence the alkaloid content, or even from tree to tree. Just like cannabis plants can have different ratios of, or different terpenoid profiles and different cannabinoid ratios even within the same strain. Um, and also there there's a certain type of being that is associated, at least with the Wilca seed, that people seem to pretty universally experience. I've actually even spoken to at least one person, my girlfriend's father, who seemed to know what I was talking about, even though he's never had any form of DMT in his entire life. But there's like this net or wall of like these purple beings with tentacles, and they seem to have sort of an individual aspect to them, but they're also sort of just like one organism. And oftentimes when you take Wilca, they're just all around you. Um, and they don't, it's a really strange thing. I do not know what to make of them. They oftentimes don't interact much, they're just sort of there. But when I mentioned them after our first experience to Enrica's father, he said, "Yeah, they're always present." And I don't know. He just he seemed to know what I was talking about, which struck me as extremely bizarre. Um, so at any rate, you guys, I mean, that's my throat's getting tired, and that's really all I can say about this. I feel like the story from Shane Mouse, if you haven't seen that, Tales from the Trip, My Purple Girlfriend, you can find it on YouTube. I personally have just received so much information that has turned out to be accurate from these beings, that I think it's at least indicative of the that we have access to a reservoir of knowledge, that we can sometimes access. If not proof that these beings are actually, hyperdimensional entities. But I would just encourage everyone, don't be so determined to come to an absolute determination about what these things are. Leave possibilities open. And, I mean, that also, one of the great dangers of giving these things objective reality, I think, is that people have a tendency, for whatever reason, to feel like if they encounter some sort of um, non-physical entity, they have to do what it tells them to do. And obviously that's gotten people, Charles Berkowitz, for example, into a lot of trouble. So, I think I really don't see why people are determined to really make decisions about this stuff. I think it's much better to just leave it open-ended. It could be part of our mind, it could be actual spirits, it could be some kind of thing in between. But what I'm certain of at this point is that we can get information that can be used to heal ourselves and others from these experiences that we normally have trouble accessing. It's certainly not impossible, but it sort of lubes the machine or makes it easier, increases the probability that we're going to be able to do it. We also can get information that is useful to us in other ways. It's certainly awesome and interesting. And, as I said, I would just leave it up to um, expanded, or leave it at just that you are open to different possibilities. If anybody has any questions or comments, since I'm getting delirious, need to pop off. I've been talking for almost an hour and a half. Um, I'll give it a few minutes because of the lag, to catch up and see. Otherwise, hit the like button one more time. Please share, subscribe, support us if you can on Patreon, or a one-time contribution to the description, or come see us down here in Ecuador in the Amazon. It's amazing. Every day, I just love waking up here. Walking out into the jungle is sort of like an ayahuasca experience in and of itself. There's always something new to discover, and it's disappearing. It's, by most estimates, it's going to be gone pretty quick. So if you haven't come here, quit delaying. Even if you don't come see us, just come down here and see it, because just like anything else, it's one thing to hear about it. It's quite another thing to experience it yourself. I think a lot of people aren't aware that we still have uncontacted tribes here, in Ecuador and Brazil and Colombia, probably Peru, I'm not sure. But there are 100 uncontacted tribes, at least in Brazil. There is an unexplored area of the Amazon the size of the continent of India, not in one place, but the total unexplored area of the Amazon is the size of India. 3 new species are discovered here every single day, and I think at least as many go extinct. So do yourself a favor and go to the Amazon. Also, if you're drinking ayahuasca in the United States or Europe or somewhere, that's cool, but it's not that cool because it's way different here in the Amazon, where you're sort of in the I think there are a couple of levels to it. The density of photons, one of the ways that I like to describe it is that, where light hits a crystal and refracts, like, um, the where the light is at its greatest density, you have the most color. And if you think about what the equator is and how there's this explosion of color where the light is at its greatest density, um, that is magical knowledge. You know, that is wisdom, to understand that that's not a coincidence. So there's that, and I think that our consciousness is light, or that it is generated by light and or EMFs, the whether it's, you know, about the interaction of particles, that, you know, give rise to the appearance of light, whatever. But it is light or the components thereof that give rise to consciousness and life. And so I think that, you know, taking a psychedelic where it's super dense, the light is part of it, and then also the biodiversity. It's kind of like being in the central being of the guy in mind. So definitely advise, or would suggest very strongly that it's worth it, to take the trip and to experience ayahuasca in her home, its home, his home. Who knows? So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. I appreciate each and every one of you. Please support us if you can. We're demonetized, and it's very helpful. So thank you so much. Be safe. Buen suerte. Good luck. And we'll see you again in a couple days. If you're a patron, we'll see you tomorrow.